Good morning to all. We are glad to have Dr. H.S. Shivprakash on this event. Dr. Shivprakash is a leading poet and playwright in Kannada. He is the director of Indian Cultural Center at the Embassy of India in Berlin. He is a winner of 4 Karnataka Sahitya Academy Best Book Prizes, Karnataka Nataka Academy Award, MHRD Fellowship for Literature and Sangeet Nataka Academy Award. His works have been translated into most Indian languages than English. He has edited an anthology of Kannada poetry in English, A String of Pearls, for Karnataka Sahitya Academy. He was the director of National Theatre Festival, sponsored by Kerala Sangeet Nataka Academy in March 2000 and January 2001. He is a former member of Karnataka Sahitya Academy. He was the teacher of Arts and Aesthetics at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. Today, he would deliver the keynote address on the topic Word to Stage to the World. I invite Dr. H.S. Shivprakash. So, please.
So, good morning, everybody. And just thinking about how I should begin my presentation, the sentence that came to my mind is that time is against me because I have to leave at least by 12 o'clock to be able to catch my flight. But stories are traditionally told to while away time. But today we're in a situation where storytelling has to happen when we are racing against time. So, in this context, I'm very happy to be here again in Kasaragod. I remember in 2001, I was a director of National Theatre Festival organized here by Kerala Sangeet Nataka Academy, and the festival focused on Indian Shakespeares. And when I mooted this subject, Master Appukotan, who was my great friend, he said, no, do something. He was initially very skeptical about this idea, but later, when he saw the outcome, he was very happy, and that festival was a big, crowd catcher, and the people in Kasaragod said, this has drawn the biggest, largest audiences to theatre in the history of this city, which is a very interesting city because it's a multilinguistic and multicultural city. So we have here Malayalam speakers, Kannada speakers, Konkani speakers, Marathi speakers, and Hindi speakers, and different religions, and so on. So this is an ideal place for a central university to take shape, and for that central university to give a new shape to Indian knowledge. Before I begin to introduce my topic, I remember that recently NCERT had a project, which I was also involved along with other academicians, how to improve higher education in India. And one of the things that all of us agreed upon, all the members were agreed upon, including the director of this project, Dr. Sudha Gopalakrishnan, was that Indian higher education is modeled too much after Euro-American models. And I think in all the central universities which have come up recently in this country, whether Central University of Karnataka in Gulbarga, Central University of Tamil Nadu in Tiruvarur, the Central University here has to keep this in mind. That reminds me of what Chinua Achebe said when Volashenka got Nobel Prize. He said, yes, he has shown we can play the white man's game according to his own rules, but it's high time we started playing according to our own rules. So even the academic games, we should learn to play according to our own rules. And this is what I think all our new universities, because other universities, established universities like JNU, have gone too much in the other direction. So a corrective has to be given to this trend of events at these universities. And also very happy about the phrasing of the topic of this two-day conference, performance, page, image, page, stage, because this promises to go beyond the established categories of literature, theatre studies, and visual studies. So this kind of interdisciplinarity is very important for our academic projects. So in this context, I will try to speak about my own personal experience of dealing with a very important material from the cultural history of Karnataka in different genres like poetry and theatre, and the transformations and translations of this material has a whole history in the medieval period of Karnataka, which extends into the modern period, and how this material, which is in one sense archetypal, it is reshaped by history through every new performance, and how it shapes history also. Unfortunately, the theory that we are using to talk about Indian performances, texts and performances, are not very friendly to the task, because our theory goes one way and our practices go another way. So it's important for us to have a practice-friendly theory for which we need a new vocabulary. We need new nomenclatures. We need new concepts. I don't claim to have evolved such concepts and theories, but I'm groping towards one. For instance, there have been scholars who have talked about different Ramayanas and the Mahabharatas. Paula Richman, for instance, who was here, has spoken about how Ramayana is performed in different continents, how it's performed in Trinidad, how it's performed in South Africa, and Indian diaspora abroad, and so on. But when you read through her lines, you get an idea that there is some essence of the Ramayana which is taking on new avatars in different historical and cultural contexts. Now, this is something very difficult for me to agree to. It's not like Parabrahman becoming every object in the universe. Something else is happening. And what is the basic concept that we need for this something else? After a lot of groping, I came across this word, this concept, Orecha, which is given by Gugi in some of his writings on performance theory. According to Gugi, Orecha is that material substratum, is not orality. Orecha is something that expresses itself through different kinds of verbal and non-verbal performances in a culture. It can express itself in the form of a proverb, a riddle, a story, a joke, a poem, a novel, a theater piece, dance, ritual, and other non-verbal performances. And what is this Orecha? Of course, Gugi doesn't very clearly define what it is, but I think it's very important to understand this concept of Orecha also. Orecha is not something that is pre-given. Orecha is the distillation of the historical experience of a people. But again, is Orecha something that unites the whole people? For example, if you look at the different versions of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and many great upholders of the great Indian culture claim that the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, they constitute the essence of Indian wisdom, because it unites different regions and languages of India. This is precisely what I don't agree to, because the Ramayana and the Mahabharata divide people as much as they unite them. So some kind of negotiation is going on between different possibilities of bringing out the unreachable essence of this orature. For example, I remember listening to oral Ramayana of the bird catcher tribes of Karnataka. In this Ramayana, sorry, not Mahabharata. In this Mahabharata, after that game of dice episode, all the Pandavas are beaten, then Draupadi takes over, and then Draupadi defeats the Kauravas and sends Kauravas into the forest. It's a complete inversion of the classical Ramayana. In between, if you look at the Bili Ramayana and the Mahabharata, it's totally different from the classical Sanskrit Mahabharata. For example, in Bili Mahabharata, Draupadi becomes the central character. At one point of time, Arjuna becomes very proud, and he starts treating Draupadi with contempt, and Draupadi wants to teach him a lesson. She calls Indra, who had been her one-time lover, and organizes a duel between Indra and Arjuna. Arjuna is defeated, and then he gets Indra to tie Arjuna to her cot, and gets Indra to make love to her on that cot. And then Arjuna feels humbled, and then Arjuna worships Draupadi as Adishakti. So we have so many different Ramayanas, so many different Mahabharatas. It's not just the Ramayanas and the Mahabharatas which are supposed to be the pan-Indian texts, which have these infinite varieties of narrative and performative possibilities. This is also true of many of the regional epics of our country. For example, in Karnataka, we have different versions of the Dalit epics, Manteswami Purana and Malay Madheshwar Purana, which are performed in different regions of Karnataka. The orature that I'm going to talk about is the 12th century socio-religious movement that happened in Karnataka. And some historians call it, even the labeling of this movement has been a contentious issue. The more classical-minded upper caste people call it a Veerashaiva movement, whereas some other call it Lingayat movement. And literary scholars call it Vachana movement, because this led to the writing efflorescence of new genre of Kannada poetry called Vachana. They call it Vachana movement. So the naming itself is a problem, nomenclature itself is a problem. But if one goes into the text of these Vachanas, none of these words are important. Of course, the word Vachana occurs quite often, but the word Veerashaiva never occurs, though Veerashaiva community of Karnataka is now claiming this Vachana movement to be its own heritage, which is now being challenged by OBCs and Dalits, because majority of the poets who participated in the socio-religious movement, which led to the assassination of an emperor, because he tried to give death sentence to people who took part in a Pratiloma marriage, where a Dalit boy was married to a Brahmin girl. So whether this event happened or not is itself questionable. There are no historical evidence to this effect. Of late, there's a school of thought which is becoming very mischievous in Karnataka. This is pioneered by one Balagangadhara from Ghent University in Belgium. And he says that there was no caste system in pre-modern India. Caste system was the colonial invention. So there was no movement in Karnataka against caste system, because these people don't use the word jati, which is the equivalent of caste. They use the word kula. Kula is another kind of identity. People don't know what they're talking about. So it's not even a question of whether this happened in history or not. In fact, we are more moved to action and creativity by things which may not have actually happened in history. Unfortunately, the word history itself is a problem. If you go to pre-modern India, of course, Indians have been accused of not having had a historical sense. But we had our own ways of telling our stories. There is a whole tradition in different Indian, pre-modern Indian literatures of writing charitra. Charita, the word charita has two meanings. One is what happened in the past. Also, it also means swabhava, the nature, the character of the hero. For example, in Bengal, there's a whole tradition of writing and rewriting the life of Chaitanya, Chaitanya Charitamrutam. Similarly, Ramacharitammanas. Charita here does not mean what history means. So we have this whole tradition of charita. In Karnataka also we have many charitas of Shaivite, Vaishnavite and Jain saints and heroes, but it's a different kind of history. And we have to recover this tradition of charita, which tries to balance between objective history and also a kind of subjective history. So this movement, the way it's represented, there's a conflict between different ways of representing it. According to upper caste versions, this was pioneered by one Brahmin saint, poet, Basavanna, who, though he was born a Brahmin, rebelled against Brahminism. The story goes that when his parents, according to one of the narratives, medieval narratives, gave him this Yagnopavita, the sacred thread, he said, this Yagnopavita is like Karmalata. This is the creeper of karma which is binding me. He tore it off and he rebelled against Brahminism and he found his own kind of Shaivism. This is the one version of it. But the other versions of in oral compositions by Dalit and tribal bards tell a different story. Here, Basavanna doesn't become an important figure. Other characters like Macheya the washerman and a Muslim character called Pir Sabi, who is mentioned only in folk sources, which is not mentioned. Maybe he had composed some vachanas, but vachanas with the texts which were remembered, which was collected and anthologized in 14th century when this movement had got the royal patronage, must have censored a lot of vachanas which were not convenient to the perspective from which they were anthologizing it. And then when we look at this, the evolution of the storytelling of this orature, the 12th century social religious movement, what happens is it becomes more and more mythified. More stories of miracles are added. For example, one of the miracles that is attributed to Saint Basavanna is that when, because he was feeding all Shiva Bhaktas free of cost, some people come there with wearing this brinjal in the form of Shivalingam, and when they came to Basavanna, all the Shivalingams turned into real Shivalingams. This is one of the miracles that is attributed to Basavanna. When you look at the folk versions, the miracles are just the opposite of it. For example, this whole movement is supposed to have taken place in the mythical city of Kalyana. Of course, there is a historical city of Kalyana in Bidar district in Karnataka, which later became part of Bahmani Empire. Once upon a time, it was the site of the Chalukyan Empire, the third Chalukyan Empire, and then Kalachuri Empire. But the city that is talked about in the Vachanas and then in these mythical narratives of Vachana movement is a different kind of Kalyana. It's an archetypal Kalyana. Now, in our Dalit narratives, for example, Manteswami Kavya, which is the expression of the right-hand sect of Dalits who are called Pulayas here, Holayas in Karnataka, a totally different kind of miracle happens. In the upper caste sects, the brinjal becomes a Shivalingam. A natural thing becomes a sacred object. Whereas in Manteswami Kavya, the sacred symbol becomes something very natural. According to this story, in spite of Basavanna's sacred presence, the city of Kalyana becomes threatened by multiplicity of crimes. Women are being raped and the virtuous are suffering, and Basavanna himself starts praying for the appearance of a true saint, and Manteswami, the saint who emerges from dung heaps, he appears and enters Kalyana and is carrying the carcass of a dead calf on his shoulder. He has a toddy in his hand, a vessel of toddy in his hand, and he has no sacred symbols like Vibhuti or Shivalingam or whatever, and the guards of the city stop him. Say, this is a sacred city, people like you shouldn't enter the city, and his body is stinking. But then, when he tries to enter forcibly, he is beaten up, and when he is beaten up, all the marks of his blows are found on wounds of his blows appear on Basavanna's body, and the Basavanna knows that the great saint has come. He comes to receive him, and then he recognizes him, and he goes to the dung heap, brings him back. But the priestly class of the Shaivite sect protest against this, and then they say that they will quit the city if he is allowed to enter the city. And then when they quit, they come back because they discover that all the Shivalingams have disappeared. And they say, this fellow in Karnataka, magic is associated with Kerala. So this text says, he is a Malayali mantrika, Malayali magician. So he has cheated us. Get us Shivalingams back. And this Manteswami says, no, I haven't touched your Shivalingam, you haven't touched me, what have to do with it? No, you've done played some dirty trick. Then he takes a swig from his toddy, gourd and says, come Shiva Bhaktas, all your Shivalingams are found in this toddy gourd. Now they don't know what to do, because if they touch this toddy gourd, they'll lose the sanctity. If they don't get the Shivalingam, they can't stay Shiva Bhaktas. So they're in this dilemma. And then at last they decide to put their hand into that gourd. When they do that, they don't find any Shivalingam. So Manteswami says, you were wearing the man-made linga. I have given you the linga of void. In Kali Yuga, you'll be liberated by the linga of void, not by man-made linga. So look at this contrast. Here, void is being given a definite shape associated with a definite sect in the upper caste versions. So in the upper caste versions, the emphasis is on external observances, performance of Shiva Puja, wearing of Rudraksha, Vibhuti, all these things. Whereas in Dalit versions, the shape is transformed into void. Here there is shaping, here in the Dalit versions, there is this kind of the dissolution of space. Because both these processes are present in all our Bhakti traditions, And one of our great saint poets, Allama Prabhu, says in one of his poems, the both form and formless are constructions. One is invocation, the other is dissolution. One is sorrow, the other is sorrowless. Beyond both these resides the Guheshwara, which is his name for the ultimate deity. So we find this totally, conflicting, contrasting versions of the movement in these two traditions of re-narrating the sacred story of the Shaivite saint Basavanna and his contemporaries, or the sacred story of the city of Kalyana. And this continues into modern period, because during the pre-modern period, there was a need to point out the diversity of Indian culture. So many of the upper caste scholars identified this movement as a reformatory movement of Hinduism. And they tried to equate the poetry of these saints to the classical tradition. Basavanna was called Kalidasa of Kannada. He is a great expert of upamas, of similes, like Kalidasa was. So they all tried to reconcile the difference between these Sanskrit traditions and non-Sanskrit traditions, though there is a very strong evidence of resistance against Sanskrit tradition in the Vachana texts themselves and in the texts, narrative texts which were created by the untouchable and other backward communities. And there have been several important, at least 4 important plays in modern Kannada are based on this movement. The first was Lankesh's play Sankranti, then came my play Mahachaitra, then came Girish Karnad's Taledanda, and recently Chandrasekhar Kambar, who got his Gnanpith Award recently, came out with another version of this movement, and this play is called Shivaratri. And of all these plays, only my play became very controversial, and I lived under threat for about 3 years. I was called Salman Rushdie of Karnataka and so on, and many Virashaiva Pandits said that we should now start declaring fatwa against such people. Unfortunately, our religion is not, doesn't have such traditions. We should start this system of fatwa in our religion and so on. And the first victim of the fatwa should have been me if this had been implemented. Now, all the 3-4 versions of these plays, and one of the things which I've been wondering about for a long time is, why did my play become so controversial? I didn't want to create any trouble, but why did my play become so controversial? I'll come back to this later. One thing common to all these versions, Lankesh's version, my version, Girish Karnad's version, and now Chandrasekhar Kambar's version, all of them question the upper caste narrative of the movement. Though all the authors of these 4 plays, except Chandrasekhar Kambar, come from upper caste, including me, they are the critiques of the upper caste versions of the movement. But only my play was targeted by Virashaiva fundamentalists. This is something, and it was a very big controversy, violent controversy. It lasted for 3 years, and the only detailed study of this whole controversy you find in a book called The Book on Trial by Girija Kumar. There's a whole section on this. And later, the Indian English novelist Geeta Hariharan wrote a novel partly based on my experiences. This novel is called In Times of Siege. Now, what is common to these plays, Lankesh's, Girish Karnad's, and the other one, Chandrasekhar Kambar's, is that they humanize Basavanna's character. They humanize Basavanna's characters, they make jokes about the system, but it doesn't quite undermine the upper caste association with Basavanna. When I wrote my play, I made Basavanna the absent hero. Because when I read these texts, I found them multivalent. There were so many voices. And there was a cacophony of voices, conflicting voices, which was creating a different kind of music. So I made Basavanna the absent hero, and I gave importance to the role played by the saints from backward communities and Dalit communities. Though when this book was attacked by Lingayat fundamentals, I don't want to go into the whole story. They said that this is written with the mischievous intention of insulting a community, and there was lots of pornographic passages in this play. There were more pornographic passages in Lankesh's play than in mine, or else in Girish Karnar's play. But the reason was something else. It's because the upper caste identity with the saint poet Basavanna was being undermined. They attacked the play. And unlike most controversies in this country, the more fiercely they attacked it, suddenly Dalit and OBC communities woke up to this reality. Equally fiercely, they defended it. But for the support I got from Dalits and OBCs in those days, and the leftists in those days, I would have been killed by those fundamentalists. So, the point is this. This is not a one-time happening. There's a whole history of conflicting, retellings of this event, which constitutes the orature, this whole tradition of retellings. And this orature is not an archetype like the Jungian archetype, which is a kind of pre-given thing. It is the distillation of historical experience in the collective minds of different groups of society. So I think this model of the orature works very well, provided we also recognize that the same orature is retold by different communities, reenacted by different communities who exist in a society, an unequal society where there is hierarchy, where there is the inequality and so on. And this is where the content of the work of art, a work of a cultural practice meets the demands of history. This, unfortunately, the scholarly accounts of this movement have based themselves too much on the upper caste versions. So I contend that in this country, when we look at the past, we should not only go by the written evidences, because written evidences are always. You want me to stop? I'll stop anyway. Unreliable, because if you take stone inscriptions to be the source of history, in Karnataka we have some stone inscriptions where every Raja who controlled 3 villages calls himself a Tribhuvanamalla, the Lord of 3 worlds. So we can't go by written records at all. We have to listen to the oral versions of it. But when I wrote my play on Tipu Sultan, for example, which of course has been translated into Malayalam, published by Mathrubhumi, not very much to the liking of Malayalis, because Malayalis have made Tipu into a kind of villain. Anyway, this play, when I read two different versions of, because after the 12th century movement, the greatest figure greatest happening in the history of Karnataka is Tipu's Mysore War, because that was the swan song of feudalism in Karnataka. I not only consulted, when I consulted the written materials, most of them I found unconvincing, because there was Muslim fundamentalist versions of Tipu Sultan, where he was a kind of crusader for Islam, blind crusader for Islam, which they glorified. There was a Hindutvawadi version, British version of it. For example, in his novel Captain's Daughter, Sir Walter Scott gives a totally different picture of Tipu Sultan. He says that Tipu Sultan was a great womanizer, brute, and all that, because Sir Walter Scott's grandson served in the British Army in the last Mysore War, and his lays buried in one of the churches in Bangalore. And Walter Scott used to get information about Tipu through his letters. And there were other Hindutvawadi versions where they said Tipu was almost a Hindu. Only thing, he didn't change his name, he's almost a Hindu. But it's in the oral narratives, particularly among the Sufis of Karnataka, that one came across a totally different Sufic interpretation of Tipu's life. So Tipu became the orature for different retellings and performances of in song, story, and theatre and works of literature in Karnataka. Of course, I have just focused only on verbal and non-verbal expressions, cultural practices, but it's important to relate this to what Gugi calls cinemachar, for example. So, for example, when the Ramayana and the Mahabharata go into cinema, what happens? And what happens when they go into what Rizio was saying, SMS, blogs, and so on, cyberchar. See, orature is the basis of all this, and the different transformations of this orature is historically mediated, and our understanding of this is also historically mediated. I'm very happy that Madhushri is here. She has done a wonderful movie on Akka Devi, Scribbles and Akka. And what is very beautiful about this movie, she does not try to give a linear narration of Akka's life. It's a kind of an orchestration and different images of Akka through which she creates a new narrative. So some of us practitioners of different genres of art have done it in our creative practice, and it's important that theoreticians should take this seriously and get some inspiration from us and do some new theory, because as Brecht always said, bad new ideas are always better than good old ideas. Thank you.